Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining this session of the DSA Summit. This is our 2021 edition, and we are very glad to have with us today our invited speaker, Alessandra Lustrati. Alessandra is the head of digital development at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Institution with the UK government. So Alessandra, thank you very much for accepting our invite and for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Martha, and thank you so much to DSA for inviting me and FCDO to the Global Summit 2021. It's always really a pleasure to try and contribute to the summit every year whenever possible and to try and share our sort of experience on digital development. So thank you for having me and having us.
Great. And we are going to discuss today a lot of very interesting programs and initiatives that FCDO has been doing. And I would like to ask you, Alessandra, if you could please tell us about the Digital Development Policy Framework and also how you see this digital access program and different initiatives within FCDO.
That's great. That's a great question. Thank you so much, Martha. I think maybe I'll start by talking a little bit about the Digital Development Policy Framework of FCDO. And maybe I'd like to highlight a little bit within it the importance of inclusive connectivity, because I think it's really very closely related to the work of DSA and the theme of the Global Summit. And absolutely later on we can also talk about specific programs, whichever way you prefer. Fantastic. So first of all, I think I can share a little bit about the recent work of the UK government, in particular of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office on digital development, so that this helps framing our discussion a little bit. So I'll give you and our distinguished listeners kind of a whistle-stop tour of FCDO's rationale and key priorities, touching briefly on the kind of why, the what, and the how we work in this field. So first of all, why do we work in digital development? For us, I mean, we've seen over the years that evidence shows that digital technologies are a key enabler of inclusive economic growth and of social development. And they have become even more critical during the past year or more in the COVID-19 context, obviously. So we've seen how having everybody being digitally connected, being able to access information and crucial services is really, really vital for people. And yet there is still a massive digital divide in the world, as you know very well, not just in the developing world, but also in emerging markets. So as this is still very significant, it brings with it a high risk of underserved population being left behind. And as we work on international development in FCDO, we are obviously very concerned about, especially those regions of the world and those partner countries where communities may be more, let's say, exposed to the risks brought by the lack of inclusive connectivity and the lack of digital inclusion more generally. And also we feel that the use of digital in development interventions specifically significantly amplifies and accelerates impact of these interventions. It also leads to better value for money, and in using basically public resources much better and more efficiently to achieve the sustainable development goals that you know, all the kind of world leaders have committed to. So that's a little bit about the why, our rationale. Then the what. What are we really trying to achieve through digital development? Essentially, we want to make sure that no one is left behind in a digital world. We want to make sure that our partner countries are able to embrace digital technology for their own sustainable development, and also that any form of digital engagement is done in a safe, secure, and responsible manner. And so that is why we focus on three main policy objectives, going to the policy framework that you were asking about. We have articulated our current policy framework on digital development around three priorities. The first one is digital inclusion, as you can imagine. It's about affordable connectivity, it's about digital literacy and skills, locally relevant digital content and digital services for underserved communities, with a really strong focus on the most disadvantaged, like remote rural populations, women and girls, people living with disability, essentially all those groups and all those people who have less you know, fortunate and they don't have access to digital engagement in the way that they would really need, like any of us in the world. And then we also should think that digital inclusion is really important, but it's part of a bigger picture because it requires those broader, let's say, processes of digital transformation. So we also work on with our partner countries to try and facilitate the adoption of digital technologies in the economy, in society, and also in government. So basically digital transformation of government, society, and the economy. And then as we do all of this, at the back of our mind, maybe very much at the front of our mind, we always want to make sure, we want to always keep the priority of what we call responsible digital, which is basically about the promotion of a safe and secure digital environment with a focus on open and transparent digital governance, on data responsibility, and on safeguarding against privacy risks and online harms. So that's, like, in a nutshell, our policy framework. But I want to very quickly zoom into our work on inclusive connectivity as an objective, but also the approach of how do we address that and why. Because for us, inclusive connectivity, while we do believe that every aspect of digital development is important, and every component in particular of digital inclusion is really foundational. Without inclusive connectivity at the basis of everything, essentially people really cannot engage online. So that's why we consider it really central to our work. From experience of the past few years in this specific field, we found that to try and help in closing that huge digital gap that still exists in the world, as I say, with almost half of the global population still offline, which is unbelievable, it's important to work at two main levels, the systemic level and the market level. At the systemic level, we try to work with our partner countries on improving policy and regulatory frameworks, but also on basically increasing the capacity of the relevant institutions that are important for these frameworks to create a conducive enabling environment for inclusive connectivity models. In this sense, we see the dialogue and the work with telecom regulators and with spectrum agencies in our partner countries as paramount. We'll go back to that, I'm sure, as we discuss with you, Marta, later on spectrum, for example. And then at the market level, we need to pay attention to basically who can deliver that inclusive, affordable, accessible connectivity. Where does that come from? And that, as you know better than me, because you're a real expert in this, the telecom industry is vast and is diverse as well. In many cases, mainstream models of major operators can work quite well, but for some segments of the markets that remain underserved or even completely excluded, especially at the last mile, which for many is basically the market frontier, it's crucial to enable also those smaller scale innovators, community-led initiatives, different type of actors in the market that can push that frontier and that can adopt technology and business models that make sense for that context. And also at this level, issues of access to spectrum, licensing, regulation have a real impact. So the market is not separated from the systemic level and vice versa. They go together. So it's all connected, and we need to maintain a holistic approach to the problem of inclusive connectivity and stay very open-minded regarding models and a solution. And then briefly, if we've understood a little bit more maybe of the why and the what, I hope, how do we actually promote digital development through the work of FCDO? We work on policy and programming. So from the policy perspective, we do policy development in the three areas that I just mentioned: inclusion, transformation, responsibility. And currently, actually, we are informing with this policy framework the definition of a new FCDO digital development strategy, which is the successor to the former Department for International Development's digital strategy 2018-20. So we are now in the kind of new cycle. Hopefully next time we talk, Marta, or maybe at the next summit, we'll be able to talk about also the new strategy. That would be fantastic. And then, of course, this is not just there to be like, a wonderful policy document, is really to inform and support and underpin our concrete work, our practical work to try and catalyze and support digital inclusion and digital development around the world. So that's our work on programming. And our focus there is on providing technical assistance and capacity building on enablers and models of digital development, rather than investing directly in technology or infrastructure. We're not the private sector. We're not going to be the investors, paying for infrastructure or technology, but we can definitely help in creating that better environment, whether it's through the kind of broad frameworks of the institutions, regulation, or whether it is about the actual capacity and skills and ways of doing things that can really help the different actors in the markets and the communities themselves. Adopting all these very agile and blended delivery models so that we can be very responsive in a very rapidly evolving context, because obviously, Marta, as you know better than me in this sector, technologies, but also business models and ways of working and regulations evolve constantly. So we also need to try and keep at pace with that, which is not easy. And that's why we try to have delivery models of programs that are quite agile. I'll say only a few words about our kind of 3 flagship initiatives in our portfolio of digital development programming. In reality, there is a kind of a plethora of different programs where FCDO has over many years, and previously DFID, adopted digital in different sectors: digital for education, digital for health, digital for agriculture, digital for financial inclusion. But very, very soon, in the past few years, we realized that we needed to actually work on the foundational elements of digital access and digital inclusion to make sure, as a kind of a cross-cutting issue, to make sure that the application of digital technologies to different sectors or to different verticals would actually work well, would actually be enabled. Otherwise, we always kind of used to hit into the, we would have a specific solution, for example, for, I don't know, digital agriculture or digital health or digital financial inclusion, but we would hit against the hurdle of people maybe having no digital connectivity at all, or maybe having very, very little digital literacy. So we have gone a little bit back to basics in trying to address these issues. First of all, through our major flagship program on digital development, the Digital Access Program, that you, Marta, know very well, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later. For the moment, I'll just say it's a cross-government partnership that supports digital inclusion, cybersecurity capacity building, and digital entrepreneurship for social impact in Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, and Indonesia. And we'll discuss that a bit later. And then other 2 programs that I would flag is the Digital Identity for Development Program, where we work with the World Bank on promoting context-specific inclusive models of digital identification and civic registration to enable citizens to access digital services and better exercise their rights online. And finally, the Digital Impact Program, through which we advise partner countries on government-led digital transformation with Oxford University's Digital Pathways, and also working with the Digital Impact Alliance to institutionalize good practice and common standards, for example, on the international principles of digital development that many people know. But let me pause here because I've probably said even too much. And maybe, Marta, I don't know whether you have questions on what I've just said. I feel like you are sort of familiar with this framework, but there might be things that you want to kind of explore more. But if not, I would actually ask you to tell us about DSA's vision on how spectrum sharing and flexible spectrum management frameworks contribute for inclusive connectivity.
Okay, so thank you very much, Alessandra, for such a clear overview about the policy framework. And I would just like to highlight that summarizing, I think the 3 pillars are really important, the 3 actions you mentioned, like inclusion, transformation, and responsibility. It really makes sense. And I think that that your vision is very clear in terms like getting connectivity, but making sure it has a purpose, and it's also done in a very responsible way. So very, very clear overview. And very interesting programs that you just mentioned. So in the case of the DSA, it is very relevant to ask, how do we think that spectrum sharing or dynamic spectrum access can promote inclusion? And that's a very relevant question. In fact, we think that every policy related to spectrum management has a clear impact in connectivity. Sometimes it's not easy to measure that or to quantify the effect of those policy and regulatory decisions, but it does have an impact, and it's a huge impact. So the way we see it is that access to spectrum shouldn't be a barrier for connectivity. And when we explain that, it means that we are seeing a lot of technologies. We think that all of them request access to spectrum, and that's a valid request. But we should try to consider those mechanisms, those access technologies that could facilitate creating more competition, more access to the spectrum, and a wider ecosystem. And that's why we, from the DSA, we promote different accessing systems. It could be through license access, unlicensed or license exempt access, or lightly licensed or spectrum sharing. All of them could be implemented in such a way that they promote connectivity. And so we think, for example, let's take some examples. if we are considering unlicensed access. So one of our main activities have been like saying, okay, let's see how people get connected to the internet. And we have found that more than half of the connections to the global IP are done using Wi-Fi. So we say like, okay, if we are using Wi-Fi, if we are seeing that request, if we see so many hybrid models for connectivity, including Wi-Fi, then it's important for regulators to consider spectrum requirements for Wi-Fi. And that's just an example, because we could also have examples of some different verticals or different stakeholders that would like to provide connectivity in an affordable manner with a long-term vision sustainable model, but at the time they don't really have access to the spectrum. So our action is working with spectrum authorities, with regulators, in order for them to understand these models, to see what the technology is proposing, and then to consider creating frameworks that could enable those types of access. And then the impact will come afterwards, because when we have more stakeholders providing connectivity, then more people will be connected. And we think there should be a combination of that.
That sounds really, really interesting, and it really aligns very closely, as you know, Marta, with our way of working with the telecom regulators, where we feel that they are just absolutely key stakeholders for us in promoting inclusive connectivity. They're absolutely central, and our approach, as you know very well, is always to just make sure that our partner organizations are kind of empowered to make their own informed choices about the different models. And as we've been working through these themes of connectivity and all the other kind of foundational elements of digital access, we realize that there are certain areas that are actually really also quite, let's say, specific, very technical, where there is constant evolution of potential of different options and different solutions. And as you were discussing about dynamic spectrum approaches, you know, obviously that is something that is well known by regulators around the world, but at the same time, there is always something more that institutions can learn about and also feel comfortable about in terms of the choices that they want to make, that where they have to obviously look at the trade-off between so many different elements in the strategies that they adopt in their countries. So obviously DSA has, you know, like quite a unique position in all of this with your expertise, your experience, and the very, very constructive, very productive relationship that you have with the telecom regulators around the world. So it just, yeah, I can see totally how this all fit together. And again, for us, you know, within the kind of bigger box, let's say, of what all the different elements that we need to look at for inclusive connectivity, there is the spectrum approaches, how we manage spectrum as a scarce resource, as you were saying at the beginning, and the dynamic approaches that we can adopt to that are very, very central, but also very specific. And that's why they require expertise, and they require the right way of managing relationships, and require having the right, all the right people in the room, so to say. Yeah. Sorry, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
No, it's perfect, Alessandra. And maybe I would like to ask you now about the digital access program. How do you think that we could, you know, make a good a win-win contribution, collaboration between that expertise in spectrum management, those you know, those new technologies, those innovative models, and how that could fit with the digital access program vision? And yeah, so what is the scope of this project, and how we could collaborate and work together?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I mentioned very briefly the digital access program, and maybe for some of the colleagues and listeners who might not be aware of it. And so I'll just kind of summarize again very quickly the overview of the overall program, and then I'll go a little bit more into the detail, as you say correctly, Marta, about how collaboration relating specifically to spectrum can fit within that picture. So the digital access program, as I said earlier, is a cross-government partnership that we have in Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, and Indonesia, and it focuses focuses on 3 different components that are interlinked: digital inclusion, cybersecurity, capacity building, and digital entrepreneurship. So I'll go to the kind of first one, what we call pillar 1, that is also the kind of lead pillar of the whole program because it's so foundational. And within this, we've already done quite a lot of work, both in terms of supporting key stakeholders in country to develop their policies and regulations related to digital access. For example, we've supported the Nigeria Communication Commission and all the stakeholders in country to develop the new Nigeria Broadband Plan last year. We've worked with the ICT authority in Kenya for the new ICT plan for Kenya for the next 4 years. We've also done a lot of work with the Communications Authority of Kenya again on regulatory frameworks like TV space, and also just very recently providing some technical assistance and facilitation for the new framework on community networks regulation and licensing, just to give you a little bit of the flavor of the different things that we've been up to. But there's so much more. I mean, we are only scratching the surface, and by working with these institutions, we realize also, you know, the kind of really important role that they have, great expertise that they have in-house, but also their kind of really strong interest. That is a real demand, a real appetite, I would say, for always looking forward to the next solution, always being ahead of the curve to try and find those the right recipes, so to say, to increase digital inclusion in their countries. Especially since what I've noticed is that since last year, in particular from the beginning of the pandemic crisis, and as we talk to telecom regulators all the time, as our but also to ICT authorities, to ministries of ICT, we found that there is even more awareness than before in terms of the need to really understand how to accelerate those solutions for the use, especially of scarce resources like spectrum, in a really smart way. And as you say correctly, Marta, in a way that is a real win-win. Because we need to find a way that both the kind of government institutions and the private sector and the communities and society find that like everybody can sort of participate in a type of a model that actually is conducive for everybody, for the government to feel that the right framework is in place, for the private sector to make sure that their business models can work, and then for society to actually benefit in a fair and equitable manner from the benefits of being included and involved in the digital world. So going back to the DAP, before I get off track a little bit more and get carried away by our passion for inclusive connectivity. So with the program, we've done a lot of diagnostic work in each country to really understand the context very well. Then obviously we have our teams in country working from the different embassies and High Commission of the UK government. We work this is a very, very specific sort of a characteristic of this program, where we are working very closely with local partners, and we do a lot of the work directly engaging with local experts, with local NGOs, with community networks, with of course with the government, as I was saying, and also talking to the industry, understanding how the private sector is operating in the country, looking not just at the kind of big operators who are there, and of course everybody knows about their role, but also looking at the margins of where basically, as I was saying earlier on, there's small scale operators, innovators, organizations that really want to push the market frontier are what they're up to, and we work in a demand driven way. So for instance, listening to the regulators, hearing what they're interested in, what type of technical assistance and expertise can we facilitate on that, but then also in the industry at the market level, what type of capacity building is needed. Sometimes it's on organizational models, sometimes on business models. It's not necessarily on the technologies per se, at least from our perspective, because we are not technologists and we are not the people who directly invest in R&D, but we are definitely, an organization that can really support that kind of building of the skills, both in the kind of local organizations, but also very importantly on the user side. So we've been doing a lot of work also on digital literacy with local communities, making sure that, as you said earlier on, Marta, that people can engage in a really meaningful way with the digital world, that they can navigate it safely. We do lots of training on cyber hygiene skills, that we build cybersecurity capacity in government and the industry, And as I said earlier on, we promote also local digital entrepreneurship. So it's a kind of a 360-degree approach in a way. So after a very in-depth diagnostic phase a couple of years ago, we've been in implementation for almost 2 years now. When COVID-19 hit, basically, we just tried to use everything that we had to convert all our digital inclusion interventions to facilitate anything that would be useful in terms of basically mitigating the indirect impacts and more direct impacts as well of the pandemic. So, for example, trying to kind of help students to study online, help people living with disabilities to be able to access government digital services that are really crucial for them, especially in this kind of really critical moment. And whatever we do, at the end of the story, as I was saying earlier on, the inclusive connectivity aspect is the foundational element. So we go back always to the same point that we needed to identify at this point where the the program is well established. We have a good relationship with all the different stakeholders. We've understood what the problems are. We've piloted quite a lot of different models and different innovations. Now what we've been able to do was to identify a number of really kind of pressure points, or if you want to call them like that, or really critical points where if we push a little bit further, we can really make a difference. And to go back to maybe the sort of topic, especially of this conversation and this summit, spectrum for us as emerged as the kind of paramount issue that needs really to be resolved and dealt with really smartly in each country of the digital access program. And we see different approaches in the different countries, which is fine, which is absolutely great. But we wanted to then, at this point, bring in the expertise of an organization like DSA that has that uniqueness that I was talking about earlier on. And that's how then, obviously, we started working together to co-design a project on. Yeah, so this is a little bit like the overview of the Digital Access Program and the reason why we thought it would be really a good idea to establish a collaboration within this program with DSA, with a specific project that would basically help us to, to work on this very central theme, I should say, of dynamic spectrum, and to support our 5 partner countries on that. So I will now maybe turn to you, Marta, as you are the expert in this, really. To maybe say a little bit more about this collaboration, how you see, the kind of, first of all, more generally, the reason for collaborating with FCDO on this, and then maybe if you want also to share a little bit more about this new project that is coming up. Yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you very much, Alessandra. Indeed, for the DSA, it's a great collaboration. We have found that we have been doing activities in the 5 selected countries. So in Brazil, we recently had great progress with the decision from Anatel to open the entire 6 GHz band for unlicensed access. We have also been working with them on the TV White Spaces framework, and we have also provided comments in different public consultations, for example, about spectrum management. We also had a very strong relationship with the other countries, with different activities and different consultations and initiatives that they had regarding spectrum sharing and dynamic spectrum access. So we found a very good match between our activities, our interests, and also the main goals of the digital access program from the connectivity perspective. So we also think it will be great to have this relationship between regulators, authorities, different stakeholders, for example, WISP, that are they are the ones that benefit from dynamic spectrum access frameworks, and they're the ones that are providing connectivity in hard to reach areas. They're the ones that are working with underserved and unserved. So we think that synergy is important. We could also work with communities. I mean, you clearly have the experience, but we work on the side of advocacy and spectrum frameworks that will benefit them. So from our side, it's like getting all the pieces of the puzzle together, and it really makes a lot of sense. So we are excited about those activities. We see that these 5 selected countries are leaders and could even increase their leadership in their respective regions regarding spectrum sharing, and that's also part of our ideal and our initiative. So that's great. And we also try, we like the FCDO approach of working with different stakeholders. So we also would like to collaborate with other institutions like APC, like the ITU, and create those synergies to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts and that we consider a quite aligned recommendations, or we identify the right problems. I think you have already done that. And then we can work on solutions from different perspectives to make sure we are more effective.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. That's fantastic. You explain it really well. And I think it's really good that you mentioned in particular then 2 points on the multi-stakeholder approach. That is very much what we've been practicing for quite a few years in FCDO and previously in DFID, on understanding that digital development is really it happens, it emerges in such a complex ecosystem that we really need always to engage, as you were saying very correctly, with government, with private sector, with civil society, with academia as well. We've been working also with local universities like the University of Strathmore in Kenya, for example. So engage in all these different parts of the picture, and the trade associations. I mean, the Association of IESPs, for example, so really, really important stakeholders, as you said, absolutely correctly. And thank you also for mentioning these other global partnerships that we have also under the Digital Access Program with the International Telecommunications Union, with the Association for Progressive Communication. We've also worked with organizations like ISOC, and ISOC is also a member of DSA, if I'm not wrong. So as you said, Marta, all these dots can be joined, and it's complex, but it's possible. And I think we are at a very good stage in which we've managed to almost like weave together all the different particular mandates and almost like the USPs of the different organizations, with all of us bringing different types of expertise, capacity, institutional mandates, relationships and networks, but all of us having together the joint goal of promoting inclusive connectivity for underserved communities in a way that is really sustainable, and it really works for the overall ecosystem, as you've said, more than once during our chat today. So if it's okay for you, Marta, I will ask a cheeky question, and I will answer that question as well from my side, don't worry. But I'd like to put you on the spot to tell us about maybe your top three, either insights or hopes or recommendations from your side as DSA on inclusive connectivity and dynamic spectrum. Kind of sort of recapping all this big discussion. What are your top three either lessons from your experience or even hopes for the future? Thanks.
Thank you, Alessandra. Well,
big question.
Yeah, I think I will address my answer from different perspectives. So I would say, like, one hope for regulators is for them to see all these tools. We would like them to know about these technologies. The technology is ready. It doesn't have to be black and white. It's not about just saying this is the way we have been doing it for many years, so we should keep doing it in the same way. We hope that regulators will see all the benefits of considering flexible frameworks. Not necessarily, there are some things that are going very well and they should continue that way, but there are many that are still not included. There are still big challenges for inclusion. So we hope that they might consider spectrum sharing and flexible frameworks as a tool in their toolbox to promote connectivity and to really get that digital inclusion. Other hope for other stakeholders, like different industry sectors and different participants on the connectivity roadmap, it's for them to also first, to get more information about these spectrum sharing opportunities. Spectrum sharing is not particular for one technology. In this, it's like a dance, and you always have to change the partner if you're in a big ball. So everyone can benefit from spectrum sharing at a certain point. It's not feeling like, okay, this is the spectrum that I have and this is the only way to use it. There are many opportunities if we make it efficient, if we use the technology that is ready, and if we find the right frameworks and identify that we don't have the same challenges in different locations. So I also would like to encourage different industry stakeholders to see the benefits of spectrum sharing. And then my final message is for those that are on the civil society side, like we still need to work together. We need to create those synergies too, in order to make it sustainable. We need to make sure that we get all the pieces together. And I think that's my final message for everyone listening to this session. Don't see spectrum sharing as something that is, oh yeah, that's far away. That's not something that is touching my reality. I think we are at a new mindset where spectrum sharing, it could be a very, very important tool for spectrum management, and we should consider it as that, and see all the benefits that it can provide in terms of connectivity.
That's amazing. Thank you, Marta. And I hope that our listeners, our friends in the summit, will believe that we haven't actually prepared these points. It's quite amazing that there are, I think that the 3 points that I wanted to make overlap quite a bit. Obviously, you're much more eloquent than me in on this subject, but I maybe my perspective is slightly different, but I cover a lot of the same key insights, I think, that you have shared. So for me, the first point would be we need to be, at least from our perspective also, especially as an institutional donor and coming at it as, you know, through a development program like the Digital Access Program or other work that we do on digital development, we are essentially technology and model agnostic. We are not coming in to say this is the only technology and this is the only model possible. You know, a little bit like you were saying, it's not necessarily black or white. But at the same time, we need to be very intentional in seeking those solutions that are conducive to digital inclusion. So we are open to many different ways of doing things, as long as, from our perspective, what gets done ultimately increases digital inclusion in a way that is really kind of sustainable and sort of appropriate to the context. So, for example, then in these contexts, dynamic spectrum approaches, spectrum sharing, they enable that more effective and efficient utilization of a scarce resource. They open up those different options. They can help the market to become more diverse, and they can create some good space for those wins-wins between different actors who dance the waltz that you were referring to. And then the second point for me is about not having a blueprint. We are not coming in again with, a way of doing things in one country and trying to replicate that same blueprint across. We actually want to just focus on supporting and empowering the key stakeholders in partner countries to make their own well-informed choices that need to be really context specific, and the technology and frameworks involved need to be appropriate and proportional as well to what are the local needs and the local resources. Yeah. And then at the same, maybe as a third final point, I promise, is don't just think about technology and the corresponding regulation. And this is more a message to all the stakeholders involved, kind of, across the landscape of stakeholders. It's also about awareness, it's about skills, it's about the capacity of the institutions and the organizations, public and private, to make the whole ecosystem for inclusive connectivity work at its best. So in this sense, I think about, the whole system, which is more than just a supply chain, is really a much more complex system, from the regulator to the main operators in the market to local level entities. And for example, in all of this, you mentioned, civil society and community level initiatives. And I always keep, at the front of my mind rather than the back, also really important organizational models like community networks. They're really helping kind of, in a way, tying the ribbon at the last mile and really get there where the underserved communities are. And I'll maybe stop it there, and I'll pass the mic back to you as our fantastic host, and I just want to say thank you so much again to you, Marta, and to be for being a great partner in all of this effort on inclusive connectivity, and really thank you to DSA for inviting us and for the collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. And about your points, I think that's the challenge, to find the right balance between going for new technologies, adopting all the opportunities that we have with the new opportunities, more capacity, more requirements from users, and making sure that no one is left behind. And I really like what you say about trying to be inclusive, considering different opportunities, different solutions. I really appreciate that. And so thank you also for this session, for sharing your expertise and the great vision from the digital policy framework. And well, we look forward also to continue working together and probably organizing a new webinar in a few months with more specific results about this collaboration. So thank you very much, Alessandra.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Marta. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great.
Okay, good. So you stop recording. Perfect. Okay, are you happy with that? Is there any point that you think we should rewrite?